an answer tonight, but this is a future prospective topic. But I think if we look at the question of how do you get people to come back, the answer is different whether you're looking at migration or you're looking at diaspora. The answer is very different. And from the point of view of diaspora, the question for me is, how do you get people to contribute regardless of where they are? Because we are part of a broader network of scattering. And I think, if you look at the earlier work of Dr. Underwood and the earlier generation of people, these are people that weren't always on the island. And yet they have had a tremendous impact on the writing of the history of Guam and the history of the Chamorro people from various vantage points. So I think there's strength in that. My point is this: that's not necessarily a negative thing, okay? And that's a different kind of question and answer than migration and getting people to come back to, to build the infrastructure, especially with the pending military buildup, et cetera. That's a whole nother discussion. Maybe the next presidential lecture series for somebody. Okay, I'll stop there. I have, I've cited most of the things I'm referring to. I didn't cite them all in my presentation, but this is a lot of the work that's rooted in this presentation. So if you're at all interested in getting those references,
feel free to contact me. I'm gonna also email Louise a copy of the presentation, and you can contact Dr. Underwood's office and you can get a hold of the presentation. And I wanted to also, I forgot to thank Robert Underwood's office. They've been tremendous. It's been an honor to come here and speak before you.
An honor to come here. Louise and Chris were excellent in setting up my arrangements. Very hospitable. The question of bringing people back, I think if you're really interested in that question, it has to do with highlighting the beauty and the generosity and the grace of our island and of our people. And not just Chamorros, all people and residents of the island. There's a beauty of this place that Chamorros on the mainland yearn for. And so if you're interested in getting people back, that's the thing I think you need to tap into. Okay, so Juice Masi. Okay, questions?
There was a comment that you made earlier about displacement. We're trying to differentiate diaspora versus migration, and I wanted to seek clarification. The migration, if you will, because of certain issues that you mentioned, could that be set up as a choice that the people made as they migrated out of the islands and to wherever they're presently at?
As opposed to being forced, you mean? Or?
Yes, yes.
Well, if I understand your question correctly, when you look at the colonial history of a people, it's not so much of having individual choice, but having limited choices to choose from. And so, for instance, I'll give you, academic words aside, one of the consequences of colonization has to do with a dependence, an economic dependence on a government that historically colonized you. And so when we're far removed from the specific events of the colonial events in which the island was taken, right? When we're far removed from that generationally, it doesn't seem like we're connected to that. So that then it's just a choice whether to leave the island or not. But economic crisis from a colonial perspective, is a consequence of a history of colonization. So if your choices are limited on the island, if your employment choices are limited, and you want to feed your family, you're going to make another choice. And part of that choice is to migrate for economic opportunity in the context of like economic decline and impoverishment, etc. So that's just one example. And does that clarify at all what you're talking about regarding choice?
I was thinking in terms of the reason why the Chamorro actually migrated was because of the military experience, if you will.
Yeah. So they made choices to enlist in the military.
But, you know, what you said earlier, I'm a product of, my parents who decided to stick around here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you always have people making different choices, but I guess what I'm saying is that the fact that Chamorros per capita served the U.S. military in those kinds of numbers per capita, I think is beyond like individual choices. It's institutional, it's historical, it's rooted in the relationship between the U.S. federal government and Guam via the armed forces. And so it's just not an individual question for me. It's the workings of history is what's going on that has affected individual people. And that's why we have common stories. Doesn't mean we all have the same story, but it is patterned, I think. So I don't know if
I wanted to follow up on that. How do you make the connection, or how do you distinguish between the colonization consequences and the policy that is behind the colonization? So that, is there such a thing as the dysphoria that happens as a result of colonization is an accident of history versus a policy of history of the colonizer? And how do we raise that consciousness in making that connection for the Chamorro who is 2 or 3 generations removed from, like you said, the act of the colonization?
That's an excellent question that I don't know if I can answer. Well, I think the policy of colonization and the moment of colonization are part and parcel of the same thing. And the second part of the question of how you get people who are far removed geographically and generationally from an understanding of that colonial history, at least from my presentation, has to do with their reflection and their discoveries as students, at least in higher education, where their ambivalence about who they are and how they fit in the States, or how they fit on the mainland, I think leads to these hard questions about colonization as you kind of start to study yourself historically. That's the phenomena that I've witnessed in myself and in my colleagues and in this new generation of students. So that's what I mean by saying that I think there's a new Chamorro renaissance of a new generation of Chamorro students that are rubbing elbows side to side with their peers of the same generation, their same cohorts among Native Americans, Chicano students, etc. And they're rubbing elbows literally in classes, asking hard questions in political science and sociology. And I think they make choices to do their senior thesis and their master's thesis on their people. And in doing that, they discover the specifics and the contradictions in U.S. policy. And that's where it sparked. Well, I think that's where the activism and the education overlaps. And so the renaissance I'm talking about is not just the writing of papers. I think that's where the moving and shaking is really happening. And I just think we're on the horizon of the new wave of this Chamorro movement. There was kind of, since the hearing in 97, I think it was, when Commonwealth was kind of shut down by the Clinton administration, there was kind of, you were in the House of Representatives at the time. So that crossroads period, we've been in that crossroads period for a while. So now I think this new generation they're asking different but similar questions, and they're bringing it, out of the academic walls, I think. I think that's what's on the horizon.